Hiking in the woods can be a relaxing and enjoyable disconnect from the worries of everyday life. Those who turn it into a hobby know the precautions to take when venturing deep into the wilderness. One of those precautions is to remember to stay on the beaten path, as venturing off of it could result in a series of events which could ultimately lead to one's untimely demise. Join me in this episode as I discuss the dangers involved of crossing paths with the forest spirit known as the Pukwudgie. Welcome back to Moonlight Lore, everyone. As always, I am your host, Jordan Hopkins. On this episode, I wanted to talk about a specific danger that's believed to be quite present in the woods of eastern United States and Canada, mainly though in the New England territory. The Pukwudgie, for those who are unfamiliar with them, are based from several different Native American tribes' folklore. These little magical creatures are said to be similar to that of gnomes or fairies from European folklore, and are said to be quite the tricksters. These little creatures are said to be roughly 2 to 3 feet in height and live away from humans, off in the woods where they can remain unseen. Depending on who you ask though, different tribes in eastern North America have different stories and ideas of how the Pukwudgie behave. Many stories tell of these little creatures as being mischievous but relatively good-natured, who like to play tricks on people to simply confuse them and are not necessarily dangerous. The Algonquin tribes in the area tell tales of Pukwudgies being as vengeful creatures, but only ever to those who treat them and their forest with disrespect. Otherwise, they are usually benevolent. Other tribes, however, like the Wampanoag tribe, say the opposite. To them, the Pukwudgie, while yes can be helpful and harmless, are just as cruel and deadly. They are innocuous tricksters and are willing to help out nearby humans, such as protecting their home or blessing their crops, but are just as likely to abduct children or sabotage equipment to cause harm. Oftentimes though, they are known to lead people off of hiking trails in the woods and lure them deeper and further from the path, so they either become lost and disoriented, or they will lure them to a cliffside edge in order to push them off to their death. According to Wampanoag legend, the Pukwudgies were the enemies of Moshop, a mythical hero and giant who was so large he would hunt and eat great whales, and created Nantucket Island by pouring the ashes of his pipe into the ocean. To the Wampanoag Natives, Moshop was beloved as a giant of creation. They believed he was responsible for the creation of Cape Cod, and revered him as a great being. Moshop was also the one who took the tribes under his wing, so to speak, and taught them how to hunt and fish. With this appreciation and affection Moshop was receiving from the humans, the Pukwudgies grew jealous. At the time, the Pukwudgies were helpful creatures to the humans, though their small acts of kindness were always ignored or had backfired to cause the humans to often blame them for their misfortunes. And with this, the Pukwudgies decided if they couldn't win over the humans' affection, they would become the thing the humans claimed them to be. The Pukwudgies decided to change direction and become tormentors rather than helpers. They would begin to sabotage and break fishing gear and boats. They plagued their crops so they couldn't grow, stole items or hid them, and aggravated the humans to the point of desperation. Knowing they could no longer go under the torment of these knee-high creatures, the humans cried out to Moshop's wife, Granny Squannet. Although Moshop was a giant, Squannet was considered one of the small people like the Pukwudgie, standing only at 2 feet tall and possessed magical powers. Often, she is associated with the ocean and the sea, and has the power to bring forth storms by arguing with her husband Moshop. When she heard the cries of the humans begging for help to deal with their tormentors, she convinced her husband Moshop to intervene. Concerned for the safety of his people, Mashop began collecting the Pukwudgies until he believed he had them all trapped in his large, strong hands. He then shook them all so violently they became confused and disoriented. He then threw them through the air, sending them soaring all across New England in an attempt to be rid of them for good. During their shaking, many Pukwudgies died. Others were killed from the fall, but there were some who managed to survive. Obviously very angry now though, the ones who managed to survive regained their senses and memory and marched back to Massachusetts. Satisfied he had done his job and pleased his wife and the humans, Mashop moved on and left the area for a while. But during his absence, the Pukwudgies returned and once again changed their relationship with the Wampanoags. Now, instead of causing trouble, misfortune, and being an overall nuisance, they became more violent and nefarious. They amped up their interactions with the Wampanoags by sneaking into their villages at night and setting fire to their huts. When the children were alone and away from the adults, they would lead them into the woods and kidnap them, never to be seen again. And what most considered to be their scariest act, luring members of the tribe into the woods with glowing lights and sounds of animals. Once they had brought them deep enough into the woods, they would change the surroundings of the forest so the human cannot find their way back out and become confused. The Pukwudgies will then begin to torment the lost human by laughing, jeering, and mocking them. Then ultimately, once they've had their fun, they murder the distressed person. Again, things were getting out of hand for the Wampanoags to handle, so they cried out again to Squannet for help. Squannet then asked her husband once more to do something, but Mashop felt that Wampanoags were becoming too reliant on him, hence for his leaving before. And now perhaps it was out of laziness or lack of caring, Mashop decided not to help the Wampanoags. He instead sent his 5 sons to go solve the problem and deal with the Pukwudgies for him. When they arrived, they were met with frantic tribe members. Some were even scared to leave their huts. It took a few days to get the lay of the land and figure out what they were dealing with, but the sons found it increasingly difficult to track and trap the elusive Pukwudgies. The Pukwudgies knew why the sons were there though, so they decided to strike first. Since they knew the 5 sons were sent to track and kill them, they would do what they had been doing to the humans, lure them into the wild to kill them first. And that's just what they did. They lured the 5 sons to an area with thick tall grass where they could hide and run unseen in, while their would-be hunters would stand helpless to their attacks. The Pukwudgies had crafted poison arrows made from plants from the forest from where they lived, and when the 5 sons were busy trying to find them in the tall grass, the Pukwudgies released a flurry of arrows from their bows, effectively ending the hunt. The 5 hunters had now become the hunted. When word spread of the deaths of the 5 sons, Mashop was furious to hear it. He returned back to New England with a rage, and both he and his wife Squannet began a vicious hunt for their enemies, crushing and destroying any Pukwudgie unfortunate enough to be caught in the eyesight of the two. Although Mashop and Squannet managed to find and exterminate many Pukwudgies during their campaign against them, some managed to hide long enough and run fast enough to escape the fate of their peers. Now scattered across New England, the Pukwudgies waited for their opportunity to return back to their home. They regrouped and laid out plans for how to deal with their giant of an enemy. When they returned, they managed to trick Mashop and lured him into a body of water where they too shot him with poisonous arrows. At this point, the legend diverges into 2 endings. With the poison arrow striking Mashop, he, just like his 5 sons before him, died from the poison. In the second ending, Mashop only falls ill and becomes tired. He realizes the Pukwudgies are too resilient, and after the death of his sons, he becomes depressed and unmotivated, leaving behind his fight for the Pukwudgies and the Wampanoag Natives forever. And now, after the defeat of their main adversary, the Pukwudgies were able to run free in the wilds of New England without a worry. But they still held their grudge on the Wampanoags and any humans to come into their area, and for no one to challenge their rule in the forest now, there the Pukwudgies remained, harassing and tormenting any person who dared venture into their territory. The folklore behind the Pukwudgies is one still spoken of and shared to this day. Being one of North America's oldest mythical beings and one of the few who purposely hunt and torment humans for fun, make for great storytelling. Could it be back before or during when the Europeans arrived in North America, there were a race of little mythical men who the natives at the time revered as forest spirits? As the name Pukwudgie translates directly to person of the wilderness, it suggests that one could simply find one or a few of them hiding away deep in the forest. And to narrow down the search even more, it seems rumors coming out of Freetown Fall River State Forest in Massachusetts might hold true. The rumors, in fact, have been so prevalent here, forest rangers have put up a Pukwudgie crossing sign as a bit of a joke and a nod to the local history. But rumors and talk around the area aren't the only thing prevalent. The forest rangers and police both receive a large number of calls from concerned citizens every year when hiking trails open back up. Coincidentally, part of this forest includes 277 acres of land, which belongs to the Wampanoag Nation as a reservation. So perhaps it's out of knowledge of the area's history that plays tricks on the minds of those who wander into the woods and think they see something off at the corner of their eye. Or there's a chance of ancient mythical beings who still reside under the canopy of trees. Either way, we get plenty of stories coming from the area. One such famous story comes to us from a long-term local of the area, Joan. As she usually did on calm sunny days, she was out walking her dog along a path in the forest, enjoying the fresh air and getting some exercise. When she and her dog continued down the trail, the dog began tugging at the leash, wanting to run off into the brush. Joan probably believed her dog just wanted to sniff out or chase some squirrels, and since there was nobody else around, she decided to let her dog off leash for a little while. But as soon as she let it loose, the dog took off, excitedly running off the path and into the thick forest. Joan quickly gave chase and took off after her dog off the forest trail to find it had stopped a little way in, but still far enough Joan had been out of breath by the time she reached it. When she noticed the dog was fixated on a certain spot and wasn't looking away or wanting to move, she looked up and followed its gaze to a sight she did not expect. A little humanoid creature about 2 feet tall with pale gray skin, short stocky legs, large lips, a long canine-like nose, and a very human-looking face was standing there watching the two of them. All three stood still, waiting for who would make the first move. But soon, Joan's dog nervously started pulling her back towards the path in the opposite direction. The two quickly left the area, and Joan was unsettled to say the least. She had just come face to face with a mythical creature believed to only have been a figment of old storytelling. When the pair finally got out of the woods, she knew no one would believe her, so she decided to keep quiet about the encounter and tried to push it to the back of her mind. But, as we know from the stories, the Pukwudgie craves human affection and attention, so according to Joan, that same night and every other night after lasting several weeks, the small creature appeared just outside of Joan's bedroom window in the middle of the night, tapping on the glass trying to wake her up. Eventually though, the creature stopped appearing, but Joan, I'm sure, still gets a feeling of eyes watching her when she ventures back into those woods. Stories similar to Joan's tend to pop up every now and then. Some, like hers, are typically harmless interactions, but others might be a bit more villainous. This next interaction I was able to dig up was one similar to that of Joan's story, only the outcome became a bit more intense than hers. A man by the name of David was walking his dog late at night along the sidewalk that ran parallel to the forest behind his house. It was just before midnight, and he and his German Shepherd were on their way home when the dog's hackles started to stand on end and it began growling at something unseen hiding in the dark woods. David believed it was probably just a bear or a bobcat that populated the wooded area around his home and tried to pull the leash to get the dog to continue on home, but the dog wouldn't budge. David tried narrowing his eyes to try and see what his dog had been growling and staring at, but since it was the middle of the night, his view was less than desirable. That is, until he began seeing glowing lights dancing among the trees. David admits that he knew this was suspicious and strange, but for some reason was drawn to walk towards those lights and to follow them. He didn't know why, but he dropped the leash he was holding and began walking towards the trees. From what he says, he knew what he was doing, he knew he shouldn't be doing this, but it was a feeling he couldn't describe. He needed to see those lights up close. He could recall when he broke into the darkness from the safety of the street lights, he could hear his dog whimpering behind him, but being as loyal of a companion as it was, it followed closely behind. He wasn't sure how far he traveled through the forest, but the lights ended up luring him to the edge of a short but very much still a steep cliff. One surely to at the very least seriously harm someone if they survived the fall. As the lights glowed over the edge and David was getting closer, the dog started barking frantically at David and even bit down on his left leg to either try to break his trance and snap him out of it or to pull him back and away from the cliff. Luckily for David, this seemed to have done the trick. As a shot of pain struck through his leg, he was able to snap out of it and retreat away from the edge. He says when he and his dog moved away from the cliffside, the light began moving towards him, and now knowing the light intended to do them harm, he grabbed the dog leash and started to run back towards town. He says he wasn't sure how far in he was, but he knew he had closed the distance between the cliff and his house in a matter of a couple of minutes, with a few pure adrenaline-fueled sprints. But he does remember he had the feeling of being watched, and it felt like something was following him through the trees and keeping pace with him, though he hadn't dared to turn around and look. When the pair eventually made it back home, David and his dog understandably couldn't sleep for the night. As David put it, "I constantly felt like we were being watched all night. No matter which room I went in my house, I felt eyes on me." He also had said the feeling hasn't gone away for the rest of his time living in that house. He constantly felt like eyes were on him and could hear strange noises outside, like tapping on the house walls and windows or bushes and sticks snapping just beyond those. From what he said, he could only handle living in that house for a few months after this incident and promptly moved far away from any kind of forested area. And although no Pukwudgie was seen in this story, David's experience has all the telling signs of Pukwudgie activity taking place. Of the many magical traits these mythical creatures possess, casting invisibility and conjuring up lights to lure people into the woods is just two of many. Others include crafting poisonous arrows for their bows, are able to create fires at will. In some folklore, they are associated closely with flowers and emit a sweet scent. They are able to transform into forest creatures like squirrels, porcupines, or birds. They can change the forest setting at will by creating illusions of trees, bushes, and other foliage. And finally, are able to mentally confuse and disorient humans they wish to lure into the woods. With all of these tools at their disposal, it's no wonder humans had feared and shown caution when entering the woods for hundreds of years with stories of these creatures around. Those living near the Freetown Fall River State Forest are fully aware of the myths and stories that circulate through their communities and the history of the Wampanoag's past. And although there are many who don't believe in them, it doesn't stop the occasional encounter from happening to those who would normally consider themselves non-believers. Time and time again, people have reported having sightings with little 2-foot-tall creatures in the forests, or simply being attacked right out by obtaining mysterious scratches, bruises, and coming down with an unexplained illness. Those who do believe know to stay away from a certain area in the forest, the same area David may have ended up in years ago in his story. An area known as the Ledge is known to have high Pukwudgie activity, as this place is historically known for being a location the Pukwudgie like to kill their human victims. Just like where David ended up in his story, this trail leads to a small cliff's edge that's known for its mysterious past of suicides, attempted suicides, cultist activities, and strange animal and human deaths littered around the forest. Now, not all of these are directly related to Pukwudgie activity, but many people do believe the strange and unexpected circumstances that have led to suicides done by people who otherwise have exhibited zero signs of depression or mental illness before are directly influenced by Pukwudgies. Some believers blame these unexpected and unexplained deaths on the homicidal creatures who reside there, leading people off into the forest at night and luring them to the edge of the cliffs, completely vulnerable for their deadly intentions. As a general rule, one should always take precautions when entering the woods. The dangers of wildlife and nature itself are two forces not to be disregarded, as both can become incredibly hostile towards those who don't take proper measures. When adding old mythical beings who turn harming and killing humans for sport into the mix, it's incredibly important to stay aware and smart while hiking. And the home of the Pukwudgie, the Freetown State Forest, is one of these places these rules need to be followed. One coincidence people like to point out is the Freetown State Forest is one of the few locations that make up the Bridgewater Triangle. Now, for those who don't know what this place is all about, it's a 200 square mile area in Massachusetts known for its incredibly large sightings of paranormal activity, poltergeist activity, Bigfoot sightings, claims of giant reptiles, UFO and alien sightings, the Pukwudgies, and of course, Thunderbird and Dover demon sightings, which I've covered previously in older episodes of the podcast, which you can also check out anytime. With so much going on in this area though, it's no wonder stories of little forest spirits like the Pukwudgies are so prevalent. Perhaps there might actually be mythical beings born from ancient stories long ago, or perhaps from knowing the history and stories of the area, cause people to see and experience things they believe to be caused by Pukwudgies. Whatever the case, Pukwudgies or not, the best advice I could give someone is to not follow any mysterious glowing lights in the woods, and stay on the forest path. Hey, thanks for listening to the episode, everyone. I really appreciate all your support and listening. If you want to go the extra mile and help me grow the podcast, the best way to do this is to give a 5-star review on iTunes and to also share with your friends and family who you think might be interested in listening to the podcast as well. In the future, I might try covering the Bridgewater Triangle for an episode, but for those who are still interested in what goes on there, you can listen to my Thunderbird and Dover Demon episodes, which are two creatures known to be present in this area. And if you're interested, Moonlight Lore has an Instagram account where I post pictures relating to specific topics I talk about here on the podcast, and you can find that by searching for Moonlight Lore Podcast. I also have a Twitter handle for the show that you can follow at Lore Moonlight for any updates I might have to make. And don't worry, I definitely don't spam either with pointless posts, so don't worry about me filling up your news feeds. Again though, I want to thank you so much for listening, and do take care. I'll see you next time.